Good Sunday morning. This is not necessarily the discussion we want to have on a Sunday morning, but it is a discussion we think should happen on a Sunday morning. It's
Sadly.
been a night of unrest across America, and I think, and Gabe and I were talking about this today, this is what happens, what we saw in Minneapolis, when indifference to institutional racism collides with horrible policing. It ends up with a homicide, a murder, a black man on the streets, dead, with a white cop's knee on his neck. It's disturbing. There's no way to get around it.
It's heartbreaking, it's disturbing, it's cruelty, it's not fair, it's so many things.
And we know a lot of men and women in law enforcement. No one we know would do this, even do anything close to this. It's horrific, and most law enforcement officers, all law enforcement officers I know, we know, condemn this act. But again, this is what happens when we don't take a stand against institutional racism and hate speak. And my father had a saying in the last couple years of his life, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now, he didn't coin that phrase.
No, and we're hearing it a lot today, but it's profound.
It's appropriate because we're coming out of a pandemic.
We're still, yeah.
Which we've been reporting on for the last 10, 12 weeks.
But we're still, all the rules still apply for us.
Absolutely. In a pandemic that has disproportionately targeted people of color in this country.
That's true too.
People who have been pent up, people who are facing economic distress. And all of a sudden, you've got this incident, and it's a powder keg. And we see it all over the country. And it raises a lot of issues that really need to be addressed, not just policing, but our attitudes in society, what we do, what we say, how we act. We have a chance to stand up here, and it is our right to protest. It is our right to march. But when people cross the line and loot and steal and rob, it does no good for anyone.
It's just taking advantage of terrible situations.
You know, we saw our friend James Craig, the police chief of Detroit, last night, telling people, outsiders who were coming in just to stir up trouble, to
it's unfortunate.
Rightfully go home. You need to protest, you need to do this, but
peacefully, and we need to support that too.
And I'll give you an example. Last night we were watching ABC, and a young reporter named Trevor Ault was covering the protests in New York, and a guy came up to him and said, "This isn't a news story, you should be marching with us." Well, that's somebody who's just being a punk and rabble-rousing. This young reporter is trying to do his job and did so
and support it
incredibly well
and
show what people are doing.
Right.
Of course it's a news story. And I'm also mindful of our nephew, my sister's son, who's black. And my sister who's got to tell him, you can't wear your hooded sweatshirt after a basketball practice. This is a kid who's a superb athlete, an incredible student, and a young man of impeccable character who happens to be black and lives in a predominantly white suburb in this country, and he has to be careful every time he leaves the house. And this is why, and this is what we're watching here, and my sister has to have this discussion.
Those moms, other moms don't have to have with their children, and remind them of simple things. It's sad, it's not fair. Those discussions at home are like the discussions at home we should all be having with our children. Those family conversations that we're all created equal. Every single one of us, nobody's different, nobody's better. And those conversations that your sister has to have at home are different than the ones that we have at home. But I think all the conversations should start at home with, we are all created equal.
And what are we going to do to change it?
We all have our part. We absolutely all have our part.
And, we had to stand up this week against hate speak in our own way, and there'll be more on that in the days to come. But I can tell you what is not helpful. What is not helpful is when we hear things like this from our president. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. When we hear talk of vicious dogs and ominous weapons. I'm going to cross a line here a little bit because I normally don't get into politics, but that is not helpful on any level. It just isn't. So what do we do? There's protest, there's marching,
petitions.
But it starts here, on the couch at home with your kids.
For everybody.
The discussion. And what's really important is not necessarily what you do on the streets today, tonight, tomorrow. It's what you do in November when you cast your vote for change and voting for the person you think will do the best for this country and to heal these wounds. And I worry about this summer when the evictions start happening and people are put out on the street. It's only going to increase the tension, the heat, the violence, and just this repression that's been brewing for so long. We saw it recently in Georgia with the unarmed black man being shot by the former cop and his son. We've seen it across the country. It's got to stop. And
I think not even coming off because we're in the midst of it, but this pandemic has
right.
people are
in some
feeling
ways,
very
I
frustrated
fear
being
it's
at
the
home, so when
perfect
they get
storm.
out-
Right. And a health issue too. I mean, you see all these people in the streets. Not everybody's wearing masks. We've been preaching this 6 feet apart and wear the mask and do your part and social distance. And yeah, people are upset, understandably, and they should be upset. But
The adrenaline has led them to forget that.
I think everybody's got to have this deep breath and have this discussion at home.
I agree.
So that's what we're thinking about on this Sunday morning. God bless you all and take care, and let's have this discussion. Let's all decide what we can do in our own way. And social media plays a big role in this. It's played a role in whipping people up, sometimes in the wrong way. We should figure out how it's going to play a role in calming people down and creating positive change in this country, in your town, in your social network community. You have a wonderful Sunday. We'll talk to you next week.